Hi, fiber artists. I'm going to use this video to explain a little more what the small quilt study is all about to get you started on that focus for this week. So let me share my screen. So whenever we start a new process, I always think it's a good idea to do a practice piece that's a smaller scale before you get started on something that you're going to spend a lot more time with. So that's the purpose of this. A small quilt study, it's just an exercise in technique before we start in earnest on your identity quilt project. So I asked you last week to prepare either a sketch or a collage, or just grab like a simple image, both for your art quilt and for this small quilt study. The small quilt study in this particular slideshow, it says 6.5 by 6.5. It doesn't really matter specifically how big your starting image and or sketch is. As long as it's, let's go with a square for simplicity, but like either 5 by 5 or 6 by 6, something close to that. So in this example, I cut out an image from a magazine, and I tried to avoid one that didn't have a ton of detail, and that was primarily made up of like larger shapes of color. Any of these I think would work well too, and you can simplify it much further as well, since the point of this is really just to give you some practice in the process, basically. So what I did first is I took a piece of tracing paper. You could use wax paper, parchment paper, just any sort of thin paper, and lay it on top. If you are having a hard time seeing through it, just tape them both up to your window and that'll help. But the tracing paper, for me, this step is not 100% necessary, but it was helpful to kind of create a map to get a sense of what your layers are. So simplifying the shapes using the tracing paper, just kind of outlining, okay, this is where I'm going to be creating different shapes of fabric. And then I numbered them based on like how I would stack them. So number 1 up here is my base layer. And then number 2, which is the second biggest, I would have put down, and then 3, and then 4. So here it made sense to do it both in terms of like background to foreground, and they happen to work out that it was sort of in size as well. So after I've broken the shapes down into layer, I can take my picture of the tracing paper and a pencil and the piece of Wonder Under. So Wonder Under is that material that you got in your package that, how do I describe it? It's different. It's not fabric. It's almost like, it's adhesive basically with a paper backing on it. That is Wonder Under. And in the next video that I'll make for you, hopefully it'll clarify better how to use it. But for right now, just know that you're going to use Wonder Under. And you're going to trace your shapes that you put on the tracing paper, transferring it to the Wonder Under. Here is the catch. The Wonder Under goes on the back of the fabric, so the shapes have to be reversed. So what you need to do is flip that tracing paper over and trace the backward shapes onto the paper backing of the Wonder Under. And again, that's the video that I'll show you, because that part is a little bit hard to explain if you're not seeing it. After you've done that, just grab your fabric pieces and attempt to match fabric approximately by color, approximately by value. Value just means the lightness or darkness. Choose fabric that's similar, or you can improvise and like totally change up your color palette. That's fine too. Patterns and solids both work. Dyeing fabric or making your own print is also an option. That's all like totally supplementary if you just have extra time and that sounds interesting to you. Determine your base color and then cut out a square of that base the same size as your picture. And then I want you to iron it, and if you have some sort of ironing board, it might be useful to pin it to the board. You could also just do it on a flat surface. So the Wonder Under will then go on the back, right? The back of the fabric that you are going to use. You're going to cut out the shapes that you traced onto your Wonder Under. I like, as you can see in this picture, like writing down which ones are which, because that was just useful for me to kind of match them. And when you cut out the pieces of Wonder Under, you don't have to spend time cutting out like the very specific shape. So see on this one, I just kind of cut roughly around the outside because you're going to end up cutting it again. So, you know, don't waste your time with that. Now you're going to grab yourself an iron. So the Wonder Under, the adhesive side is what's touching the fabric. It kind of looks a little bit like a netting, and then the paper side is the part that you are going to iron. This is really, really important because if you flip it the wrong way, that adhesive is just going to stick to your iron and ruin your iron until you can clean it with a special ironing cleaner. So make sure, practice this first on just like a small piece, get a sense so that you really know which one it is. So you're gonna iron the pieces of the Wonder Under onto the back of your chosen fabrics, and then you can cut out the shapes more specifically. Okay, so here I've cut out all the shapes. There's Wonder Under on the back, and I'm arranging them on my base fabric. And once I'm ready to piece them all together, I just peel off the paper backing on the back of each of these pieces that is part of the Wonder Under. Just peel that away, and just the adhesive netting will stay. And then I can use an iron to press all those pieces together, and the heat is going to set them, and they're going to be glued together. Now the glue doesn't last forever, but it's a really, really helpful step to get you ready to sew on top, and it's the thread that's going to hold it together. So at this point, again, we're ready to sew. Here's where I am, and here's my reference picture that I started with. And you're going to take a piece of batting and then a piece of another fabric and make that classic quilting sandwich, just like we did in the practice piece, of fabric, batting, and then your small quilt study on top. And you can trim them so that the edges are even as well, makes it even nicer. Pin it all the way around with the pins perpendicular to the edge. Zigzag finish the edge just like we did in the practice piece. If you need to review that video, go back to it. Remember that you can usually go just right on top of the pins, but if that starts to give you trouble and your needle keeps breaking, then just take the pins out as the presser foot approaches the pin. Then this is the really fun part, is doing the free motion stitching and adding texture and stuff. So I like to pick out threads that work with the fabric. You could do contrasting threads if you like. Those are all artistic choices that you can choose. Here I say find thread that works with your fabrics, and the bobbin thread can be really any color because that's just going to show up on the back. And then of course with free motion, remember that as you're setting up for a free motion, you're replacing the standard presser foot with the free motion foot, you're dropping the feed dogs, and you're putting the thread of the bobbin through the finger for better lower thread tension. And then you get to sew. So you can sew around all the edges of the shapes first so that they stay in place. And then you can use free motion sewing to just add texture and detail. Okay, that's the small quilt study sort of overview, and I'll make another video so that you can understand kind of how the Wonder Under part works.